I'm Julia, I'm 33, and my parents sold my inheritance behind my back, so I let them move into a trap. You know those moments when the floor just disappears from under you? I had one 6 months ago. A Thursday. I was at work, pitching a new campaign to a client, this big sustainability brand I'd been chasing for weeks, when my phone started buzzing. Over and over. First it was my dad, then mom, then both. Text after text. Call us when you can. Urgent. My heart dropped. I thought something terrible had happened. A car accident. My brother. Maybe something with grandma. I excused myself mid-meeting, apologized to the client, and ducked into the hallway with my heart pounding like a war drum. I called Dad first. He answered on the second ring, sounding of all things cheerful. Hey, Jules. We've got great news, he said. Okay, I said slowly. Is everything all right? Oh yeah. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. We sold the lake house. Silence. I stood there frozen, the hallway spinning a little. Wait. What did you just say? We sold the lake house, he said again, like he was announcing the weather. Closed this morning. No, I said, trying to stay calm. You mean my lake house? Grandpa's place on Lake Hartley. Well, he said with a weird chuckle, technically, yeah. But you weren't using it, and it just didn't make sense to let it sit there gathering dust. We got a great cash offer. Couldn't pass it up. I felt my mouth go dry. That house was in my name. On paper, sure, Mom chimed in now, her voice all sunshine and justification. But honey, we've been paying the property taxes, the maintenance, the pest control. Don't forget that time we had to replace the roof. You think that came cheap? You forged my signature, I whispered. There was a pause. Don't be dramatic, Julia, Dad said. We had to move quickly. It was a private deal. The buyer didn't want a long process. You sold my inheritance without asking, I said. Without even telling me. We needed the money, Mom said, her voice suddenly harder. We had some debt to clear. And you're single, you don't have kids. What were you even going to do with that house? Let it rot. I couldn't respond. I was standing outside my office, watching people walk by with iced coffees and earbuds, and inside I was screaming. They had no remorse. None. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to brag, and it wasn't just about the money. That house meant something. It wasn't just a property. It was legacy. It was the one thing my grandfather had left to me and me alone. He told me a dozen times, that house is yours. It'll be your backup if life ever gets rough. Don't let anyone touch it. He'd put it in a living trust when I turned 18. I'd seen the paperwork. It was locked down. Or so I thought. I spent that entire night shaking. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch in silence, just stunned. Heartbroken. And underneath all that? Angry. A kind of rage I didn't even know I was capable of. The next morning, I went down to the county records office. I wanted to believe there'd been some mistake. There hadn't. They'd filed a quitclaim deed using my name, only it was misspelled. A trick. Just different enough not to flag immediately, but close enough that no one questioned it. And they'd used a notary who didn't exist. I called a lawyer. He looked over everything, sighed, and told me the truth I already suspected. You could fight this. But it's going to cost a lot more than what the house was worth. How much more? I asked. Easily 6 figures, he said. And with the buyer being private and technically uninvolved in the forgery, the court would need proof of intentional fraud. Your parents would probably walk with a slap on the wrist. I thanked him and left his office with a pit in my stomach. They had stolen from me. Stolen, and they were going to get away with it. I didn't speak to them for 3 weeks after that. Ignored every call, every message. My mom finally left a voicemail crying about how ungrateful I was, how hard things had been financially, how they didn't deserve this kind of treatment after everything we've done for you. Like they were the victims. Then, a month later, like nothing ever happened, they called me again. This time, all smiles. Guess what? Mom said, we found the perfect condo. The one with the rooftop deck and that modern kitchen you showed us online. And we signed the lease. I didn't say anything. Move-in is next Saturday, she continued. We could really use your help getting the boxes up to the second floor. You know how dad's back is? Still, I said nothing, because what they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that the building they were moving into, I had bought it 2 years ago, using my bonus from landing my biggest client. I'd bought the 4-unit building through a shell LLC. I rented out 3 of the units and kept the 4th vacant, updating it slowly. Quietly, the place looked amazing on the outside. Gentrified, modernized, staged like an HGTV dream. But inside, it was filled with people I handpicked. A 20-something DJ who hosted underground raves until 4 a.m. A couple going through a loud, messy divorce with nightly screaming matches that echoed through the vents, and my favorite, an Instagram influencer who recorded beauty tutorials at 6 a.m. with ring lights and Ariana Grande blasting through her speaker. I wasn't cruel, but I was strategic. I gave each of those tenants 6-month leases with heavy discounts if they promised not to hold back on being themselves. And now my parents, who had stolen my future, were going to be neighbors with chaos. You might think that sounds petty, but when someone robs you of something sacred and calls it no big deal, you start seeing justice differently. So I agreed to help them move, smiled as I carried their boxes, congratulated them on the new place, and when they started noticing the 3 a.m. bass drops, or the arguments that rattled the pipes, I smiled, because my revenge had just begun. My parents always had this way of making me feel like I owed them something. Like just being born meant I'd signed a lifetime contract to repay them in silent obedience. And for most of my life, I played along. I was the good daughter. The one who cleaned up after Thanksgiving while my brother went to go watch the game. The one who paid her own college tuition. The one who never asked for help because I knew the answer would be, "We're doing the best we can, Julia." They weren't monsters. That's the thing. It would be easier if they were. They weren't abusive or neglectful. Just quietly selfish. Emotionally withholding. Masters of manipulation disguised as Midwestern politeness. They didn't scream. They guilt. They didn't hit. They sigh-shamed. "After all we've done for you," my mom would say whenever I tried to assert even the smallest boundary. Like saying no to babysitting my nephew on my only free weekend. Or asking them to call before just dropping by. I learned early that love in our house was transactional. If you wanted affection, you had to earn it. And when you stopped performing, you were punished not with rage, but with disappointment. That cold, subtle distance that hurt worse than yelling ever could. My brother, Matt, never seemed to notice it. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care. He was their golden child. Could do no wrong. Blew through 3 jobs in 4 years. Just finding himself. Got his girlfriend pregnant at 23? At least he's staying involved. But when I got a promotion at work and couldn't make it to a family cookout, "You're always so busy, Jules." Too busy for family. I think the rot really started when my grandfather died. He was the only one in the family who made me feel truly seen. Pop had this quiet wisdom to him, a patience that made you feel like your voice mattered. When I was 10, he gave me an old Polaroid camera and told me, "Show me how you see the world." That moment changed everything. It's what led me to design school, to the career I built, to everything I am now. When Pop passed, he left the lake house to me in his will. Not to the family. To me. "I want her to have something no one can take from her," he told the lawyer. I remember sitting in the room when the will was read. My mom's face went pale when she heard that line. She didn't argue, though. Not out loud. She just smiled and said, "Of course. That's so generous." But she never meant it, because from that day on, that house became a silent point of resentment. Anytime I mentioned it, my parents would change the subject. Anytime I visited, they'd make passive remarks about how a place like that needs real care, or it's a shame to let something that nice go unused. They hated that it wasn't theirs. I didn't even live in it, to be honest. I rented it out to a quiet, older couple who paid under market value. I wasn't using it for profit, I wanted it preserved. Protected. It was a memory. A part of Pop that I couldn't let go of, but I guess to them, it was just money sitting still. I should have known they were circling it like vultures. The signs were there. 6 months before they sold it, my dad called and asked about the deed. "Just curious," he said. "Do you know where it's stored?" I told him it was with the lawyer. "Why?" I asked. Just thinking about long-term planning, he said casually. You know how things get messy if anything ever happens to you. It was framed like concern, but looking back now, it was calculation, and then there were the comments about debt. My mom kept dropping hints during Sunday calls. Things have been tight since your dad's back surgery. We're thinking of refinancing the house. Your brother's been asking for help again. I always offered sympathy. But not money, and I guess they noticed. I didn't find out until later that they'd already contacted 3 buyers before forging the sale. That they'd been floating hypothetical scenarios to real estate agents, pretending they had permission. They were planning it for months, and when it finally happened, when they signed my name without asking, when they cashed the check and used it to pay off their bills, they didn't even think I'd be that upset. We raised you, Julia, Mom said when I confronted her. That house wouldn't even be in your name if not for us. You think Pop would have left it to you if we hadn't talked about it with him. That broke me. It was like she couldn't even admit the truth. Someone else had valued me more than she did. She had to rewrite history just to live with herself, and for a minute, I almost let her. I almost accepted it. Almost chalked it up as just another scar in our messy family history, but then something snapped. I remembered what my therapist once told me: just because someone gave you life doesn't mean they're entitled to ruin it. So I made a choice. If they wanted to take what was mine, then I'd take something too, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. The trap started with a smile. Fake forgiveness. I told them I understood. That I knew times were hard. That I appreciated everything they'd done for me growing up. I even offered to help them find a place. Nothing too expensive, I said. But something with a view. You deserve that. I knew exactly where to take them. I had bought the building on 48th and Pine almost 2 years earlier. It was an investment property, but more than that, it was a test lab. I'd been slowly renovating it, unit by unit. Watching how people lived. How sound traveled. How heat rose. Every flaw cataloged. Every weak point studied. I wanted to understand space on a human level. How to design for discomfort and disguise it as luxury. The 4th unit was perfect for them. 2 bedrooms. Faux marble counters. Cheap laminate floors made to look like hardwood. A balcony that overlooked the alley dumpsters, but staged with a cute bistro set for illusion, and noise. Oh, the noise. The couple below them were part-time drag performers who practiced choreography at home. Above them, a dog trainer who specialized in rescue pit bulls. I didn't plan that part. It just happened, but I wasn't mad. When I showed my parents the unit, Mom gasped, "Oh, Julia, it's beautiful. Look at the backsplash." I nodded. Right? And it's rent-controlled. You're getting a steal. Dad looked skeptical. Who owns the building? I shrugged. Some private LLC. I found it through a friend. They signed the lease that afternoon, and I helped them move in with a straight face. It wasn't instant, of course. The unraveling was slow. That's what made it perfect. It started with the heat. Why is it always cold in the bedroom? Mom texted 2 weeks later. Old insulation, I replied. You should try a space heater. Then it was the neighbors. There's this woman who screams into a ring light at 6 a.m., Dad said. Some kind of makeup blogger. Content creation is hard work, I said. Be patient. Then came the packages. Lost. Stolen. Or just left in puddles on the stoop, and still I smiled. I brought them muffins. I played the role of dutiful daughter, checking in every Sunday, listening to their complaints like I didn't already know exactly what was coming next. Maybe we made a mistake, Mom whispered one night after wine. That condo, it's not what I imagined. I nodded. Sometimes you have to live in something to see it clearly. She didn't catch the irony. Of course she didn't. They had no idea they were living in a structure I'd rebuilt from the studs. Every soundproof panel removed. Every corner echoing by design. A place that looked like comfort, but felt like consequences, because I wasn't just punishing them. I was teaching them about boundaries, about respect, about what it feels like to live with someone else's decisions without being asked. It was 2 months after the move when my parents crossed the final line. And this time, it wasn't just selfish, it was calculated, cold, and humiliating in a way I still can't fully explain. I was already simmering, of course. I hadn't forgotten the lake house. I hadn't moved on. Every time I drove by a body of water, or smelled cedarwood, or saw an old-fashioned fishing pole, it all came back. That house had been mine. And they'd taken it like it was an old dish towel they'd lent me and decided to toss out. But I was playing the long game. So I kept the mask on. I showed up with bagels. I called to check in. I helped my mom find a new doctor when her old one retired. I drove my dad to Costco when his car battery died. I played the part because they needed to trust me. I needed them to think everything was normal, that their betrayal hadn't landed. But underneath the smiles and polite hugs, I was watching, waiting, building something beneath the surface, and then came the day that changed everything. It was a Sunday. Brunch at my brother's house. Matt and his wife, Lexi, had just had their second baby, a little boy named Oliver. The family was gathering to celebrate, pass the baby around, pretend like we were functional. I brought a hand-knit blanket and a bottle of wine, and I brought my armor. The moment I walked in, I knew something was off. My mom didn't hug me. My dad barely looked up from the couch. Lexi gave me a strange, tight smile. Even Matt seemed twitchy, glancing between me and our parents like something unsaid was hovering in the air. I figured it was the usual family awkwardness. Maybe some new guilt bubbling under the surface. Maybe the walls of their dream condo were finally closing in. I took a mimosa and tried to stay neutral, but halfway through the meal, it hit me like a slap. We were sitting around the dining table, plastic plates, crumbs from baby shower cupcakes still scattered around, when Lexi pulled out a thick white envelope and handed it to my parents. "It's all official now," she said brightly. "Thought you might want a copy." Mom gasped and opened it right there, smiling like it was a lottery ticket. "Oh, Lex, this is perfect. Thank you, sweetheart." She passed it to Dad, who nodded and folded it carefully, tucking it into his jacket. I was chewing on a piece of cold quiche, trying to figure out what the hell just happened, when Matt cleared his throat. "We figured it was time," he said, not looking at me. "You know, to keep things clear. For the future." I put my fork down. "What's going on?" Lexi smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a little estate planning." "What kind of estate planning?" I asked. Matt finally looked at me. "We put Mom and Dad on the deed for the new house," he said. "So if anything ever happens, they're secure." My stomach dropped. "You what?" "It's just a precaution," Lexi jumped in. "We talked to a lawyer. It made the most sense. Plus, now your parents are technically part owners of our home. You know, in case they ever want to move again." "They just did move," I said. "And they're renters." "Well," Mom said gently, "we've been thinking it might not be long-term. The building's loud. Not quite what we hoped." I looked at her. Then at Matt. "Wait a second," I said. "You're planning to move them into your house?" "Not right away," Matt said. "But eventually, yeah. We figured we'd renovate the downstairs suite, turn it into something separate. Give them privacy." I stared at him. "You're moving them into a house you just bought, that you can barely afford, and giving them part ownership?" Matt's face tightened. "It's family, Julia." I turned to my parents. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "We didn't want to cause tension," Mom said. "We knew you'd overreact." I laughed. Actually laughed. Overreact. They'd stolen my inheritance, forged my name, and now they were being gifted partial ownership in a new house from my brother, a house they hadn't lifted a finger to pay for, and I was the one who might overreact. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You stole a six-figure property from me, lied about it, forged legal documents, then moved into a condo I helped you find, which you've done nothing but complain about. And now, instead of owning up to it or even attempting to make it right, you're being rewarded with a share of Matt's house." The room was silent. Dad finally spoke. "You've always been dramatic, Julia." That word again. "Like grief is melodrama. Like rage is performance." I looked at Matt. "Did you know what they did with the lake house?" He swallowed. "They said it was complicated." "Did they tell you they forged my signature?" He didn't answer. Lexi shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't want to get in the middle." "Oh, you're in it now," I said, standing up. "Julia." Mom tried to grab my arm. I pulled away. "I hope you enjoy your new arrangement," I said coldly. "Because you're going to need each other." And I walked out. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Not crying. Not shaking. Just processing. This wasn't just about the house anymore. Or even the money. This was about something deeper. About the way they'd rewritten the story. In their version, I was the selfish one. The dramatic one. The difficult daughter who couldn't let things go. They'd stolen from me and then told themselves it was necessary, that it was their right, and now they were manipulating my brother into enshrining that entitlement with legal paperwork. They weren't sorry. They weren't even pretending to be. And that's when the betrayal crystallized into something else. Resolved. I was done waiting for them to see what they'd done. Done playing nice. Done keeping the peace. If they wanted to treat me like the villain, fine. Then I'd show them what a villain really looked like. I started with the condo. That very night, I logged into the management portal and flagged their unit for maintenance observation. That let me queue non-emergency inspections, which meant surprise visits from pest control, fire safety checks, and insurance walkthroughs. The next morning, a mold specialist knocked on their door. 2 days later, a city inspector came by with a clipboard and a sour expression. There was nothing actually wrong, I knew that, but the pressure? The disruption. It wore them down. I also started raising rents on the other units. Not drastically, just enough to push the chaos into overdrive. The influencer girl moved in her boyfriend. The dog trainer adopted a second rescue. The rave DJ started streaming on TikTok loudly every Friday night. The building became what they made of me: misunderstood, misrepresented, and mismanaged. And then I went after the bigger piece. The part that still twisted in my gut at 3 a.m. the lake house. I started with a title search. Found the investor who'd bought it. Traced his LLC back to a sleazy little office in a strip mall across town. Then I made an offer, not to buy it back. To buy the property next door. And I did. A tiny, battered shack with peeling paint and bad plumbing. Not worth much. But the location? Perfect. Because what I did next wasn't about value. It was about reminder. I hired a local artist to install a massive mural on the side of the shack, one that faced the lake house directly. It said, in bold black letters, "Not everything stolen is forgotten." Underneath, I added a small brass plaque. For pop, I didn't sign my name. Didn't need to point. 2 weeks later, I got a text from my mom. "What did you do to the lake?" I didn't respond. 2 hours after that, Matt called. I let it go to voicemail. They'd built a lie and invited everyone into it, painted themselves as victims, as martyrs. But now the truth was literally staring them in the face. And I wasn't done. I didn't answer their calls. Not after the mural. Not after Matt's voicemail. Not when Mom sent a series of increasingly dramatic texts that ranged from "we need to talk" to "this is getting out of hand." I let them sit in silence, the same way they'd let me sit in betrayal. The funny thing about silence is that it becomes loud, deafening, even. And after a while, it stops being punishment. It becomes power. It was around this time that something in me truly cracked open. Not in the dramatic, screaming into a pillow kind of way. That had already happened, months earlier. No, this was quieter. A subtle breaking. Like when a bone fractures in a clean line, and you don't realize it until you try to walk again and the pain won't let you forget. I realized I didn't miss them. Not really. I missed the idea of them, of having parents who cared, who protected. Who didn't just take, but the reality. The actual living versions. I didn't miss that at all. That's when I stopped trying to get even and started trying to get free. I went back to therapy. I told my therapist, Angela, everything. About the forgery, the condo trap, the mural. She didn't judge me. She just leaned forward, nodded slowly, and said, "Okay. So, what do you want now, Julia?" And I didn't know how to answer, because revenge had become my oxygen. And suddenly, it wasn't enough anymore. "I want them to know what they did," I said quietly. Angela tilted her head. "Don't they already know?" I shook my head. "They know they hurt me. But they don't think they did anything wrong. They still think they had the right." That's the part that breaks me. Angela was quiet for a while. Then she said something I'll never forget. "People like that rewrite the past to survive their own guilt. You can't change their story, Julia. You can only stop playing a character in it." And that's when it clicked. I'd been trying to force them to admit the truth. Trying to corner them into accountability, but I didn't need an apology. I needed a life that didn't orbit them anymore. I started small, blocked them on social media. Turned off notifications from the family group chat. When Matt sent another guilt-laced message, "Mom's crying every night. You've made your point. I deleted it without reading the rest. I took their key out of my drawer and threw it in the trash. I made space, and the weirdest part, it felt good. But breaking free from someone doesn't happen in a day. Especially when they've built an entire identity around your guilt. The real test came 3 weeks later. I was working late at the agency. My team had just landed a deal with a tech company that wanted a full rebrand logo, web, packaging, everything. It was the kind of job I lived for. The kind of job Pop would have been proud of. I stayed after hours, sketching logo concepts by hand, music low in the background, my head finally in something that didn't involve family or retaliation or emotional damage. Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did, and it was Matt. "Julia," he said, breathless. "It's Dad." He collapsed. Ambulance took him. They think it's his heart. I sat completely still. "Where?" I asked. "Mercy General." I was out the door in less than a minute. Everything fell away. The betrayal, the mural, the condo noise complaints. For one brief second, all I could think was not like this. Not before he understands. Not before he sees. The ER was chaos when I arrived. Fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, a crying toddler somewhere behind the curtain. I found Matt pacing near the vending machines, eyes red. "He's stable," he said before I could ask. "Minor heart attack. They're keeping him overnight." Relief hit me like a wave, then anger, then confusion. It was a carousel of emotion I wasn't prepared for. Mom was sitting in the corner of the waiting room, staring at her phone like it held the answer to everything. She looked up, saw me, and immediately started crying. I didn't move. Didn't go to her. Didn't say a word. Matt rubbed the back of his neck. He's been under a lot of stress. I turned slowly to face him. From what? Being gifted a house he didn't earn. That's not fair. "No," I said. "What's not fair is that I'm here again, in crisis, cleaning up the mess of a man who let me down." Matt flinched. "I didn't come for him," I added. "I came because I couldn't live with not knowing. But don't mistake that for reconciliation." He nodded, tight-jawed. "He asked for you," Matt said after a beat. Said he wanted to talk. I don't know what I'd say back. Maybe just listen. I thought about that. I thought about everything I wanted to say. About the inheritance. The forgery. The mural. But when I walked into that hospital room and saw my dad hooked up to monitors, pale, shrunken, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen, none of it came out. Instead, I sat in the chair beside him. He opened his eyes slowly, blinked at me. "Jules." "I'm here," I said, flat. He swallowed. "Didn't think you would be. I didn't think you'd survive this long." A half smile. "Fair." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then he said something that finally cracked the surface. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at him. Really looked. He was serious. "But not sorry. There's a difference. You meant to benefit from me," I said. "And you didn't care what that cost." He nodded slowly. "I thought it'd all balance out. That it was just a house. It wasn't. I know that now." "No, you don't," I said. "Because you're still justifying it. Still trying to make it smaller than it was." But it wasn't just real estate. It was memory. It was trust. It was all I had left of Pop. His eyes filled. For a second, I thought he might say the words I'd waited my whole life to hear, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "I don't know how to fix it." And for the first time, I believed him. He didn't know, because fixing it would have meant facing himself. And that was something he'd never learned how to do. I stood. "I hope you get better," I said. "But I'm done trying to be the daughter you can take from without consequence." And I left. I didn't cry. Not until I got back in my car. Not until I sat there, parked under a flickering streetlight, and realized that this was what freedom really felt like. Not revenge, not control, just choosing not to carry the weight anymore. When I got home, the mural was still standing, and for the first time, I looked at it with peace instead of rage. It wasn't about making them pay anymore. It was about letting myself go. That was the real breaking point. Not when they sold my inheritance. Not when they faked my name. But when I finally stopped trying to make sense of people who'd never see what they did. And started building a life that didn't include them at the center. There's a strange kind of calm that settles in after a storm you didn't cause. Once I left the hospital that night, everything changed. Not dramatically, there were no fireworks or slammed doors. But inside me, something shifted. A door closed. And this time, I wasn't standing there waiting for it to open again. I was walking away from it, keys in hand. After years of being their emotional safety net, the person who got the late-night calls, who showed up when Matt flaked, who took the high road even when it scraped me raw, I was finally done performing. And that's when I started seeing things clearly, all the cracks in their foundation, all the ways I could, if I wanted, flip the script. You see, my parents didn't just betray me. They built their lives on the assumption that I would always be there, the responsible one. The helper, the one who cleaned up after the messes. Even after they stole from me, they still assumed I'd show up. And I did for a while. I showed up with bagels and favors and fake smiles. I gave them just enough rope to tie the knot themselves. But now I wasn't just walking away. I was pulling threads, starting with the condo. I'd been letting the chaos unfold naturally, the loud neighbors, the surprise inspections, the subtle decay of what looked like comfort. But now I began fine-tuning it. I raised the rent on the other units again, only slightly, just enough to bring in new tenants. The kind who didn't care about noise ordinances or shared spaces. The kind who threw furniture together from Facebook Marketplace and hosted casual wine tastings that turned into shouting matches. Then I installed a new Wi-Fi system that throttled speed every evening from 6 to 10 p.m. and, just to top it off, I accidentally rerouted their mail delivery for 2 weeks straight. I blamed the building manager, who, of course, didn't exist. Mom called me in a panic when her Amazon package of probiotics never arrived. "Jules, can you call the landlord? I don't even know who to talk to." I smiled into the phone. "I'll look into it," I said sweetly. These LLCs can be tricky. They still had no idea it was me, and that was the best part, because the trap they walked into, it wasn't physical. It was psychological. They thought they were clever, getting the lake house. They thought they'd escaped consequences, but what they didn't realize was that they'd stepped into a new story. My story, point one, where they weren't in control anymore. Still, revenge wasn't my endgame. Liberation was, and the final piece of that liberation was telling the truth, publicly. I'd thought about it for months. Writing something. Saying something. Maybe a blog post. Maybe an anonymous essay. But then I got an email from an editor at a popular digital magazine, someone who had seen my branding work and wanted to feature a personal story angle from a female creative. They wanted authenticity. They wanted emotion. They wanted betrayal, resilience, reinvention. I sent them a pitch titled, "The Inheritance They Stole and the Freedom I Built Without It." They said yes within 48 hours. And so I wrote about the lake house and the forged documents and the way it shattered something in me I didn't know could break. I wrote about being the responsible daughter and how that label became a leash. I wrote about setting boundaries, about watching my parents become strangers, about learning that grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about letting the living go. I left names out, but not details. And when the story published 3 weeks later, on a sunny Monday morning, my inbox exploded. Hundreds of emails. Messages from strangers. From women who had been cut out of wills. From daughters who were expected to carry families on their backs. From professionals who had worked and saved and sacrificed, only to be robbed blind by the people who should have lifted them up. "You told my story." I cried reading this. I thought I was the only one. And the most ironic part, it went viral. Not in a Kardashian way. Not overnight, but slowly, quietly. It started getting shared in forums and groups. It made its way into inboxes, passed from sister to sister, friend to friend, and eventually, it landed in their hands. I knew because Matt called me in a fury. "Did you write this?" he demanded. I did. "You aired our family drama online?" "Our family drama?" I repeated. "Matt, they committed fraud." "That's not drama. That's a felony. You didn't even use your name." "But it's obvious. People are talking." Lexi's parents read it. "What were you thinking?" I exhaled slowly. "I was thinking," I said, "that I've kept their secrets long enough." He was silent. Then, quieter. "Mom's been crying for days." "She can cry," I said. "I cried for months." He hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. Just clean, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was choking on swallowed words. They stopped calling after that. for a while, and then came the letter. A real one. I in the mail. Handwritten. Folded neatly in a cream envelope with loopy cursive that I instantly recognized. My mother. It started with pleasantries. Hope you're well. Sorry we haven't spoken. Your father's doing better. Then came the guilt. I just don't understand how we ended up here. We only wanted what was best. Maybe we didn't do it the right way, but we've always loved you. Then came the hook. We'd like to meet. Talk. Maybe try to move forward. Start fresh. I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer, not to respond, but to remind myself what it sounds like when a liar wants you to come back to the scene of the crime. Because the truth is, I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman who would have said yes to that meeting, she was gone. I in her place was someone new, someone who didn't need their approval to feel worthy, someone who didn't flinch every time her phone buzzed, someone who could sit in her own apartment, surrounded by her own life, her own success, her own freedom, and finally breathe. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I was restoring balance, and every day that passed without their voice in my ear was a day closer to peace. The final move came 6 weeks later. A realtor called. The property next to the lake house, the one I'd bought, the one with the mural, had a buyer. They wanted to renovate it. Turn it into a guest retreat. Restore the charm. She asked if I was willing to sell. I said yes, but under one condition. The mural stayed. She hesitated. It's rather bold. It's a memorial, I said. For a man who told the truth when no one else would. She paused, then said, okay. And, just like that, the house was gone. Not stolen. Given. By me. On my terms. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need to, because by then, the trap wasn't the condo. It wasn't the noise, or the lost packages, or the inspections. It was the reality they had to wake up to every day, that the daughter they took advantage of was gone, and the woman who replaced her wasn't playing their game anymore. It's funny how people react when their control starts slipping. They don't panic at first. They deny. They explain. They blame. And then, when nothing works, they unravel. That's what started happening to my parents, slowly but surely. The condo, once their fresh start, had become a pressure cooker. The noise, the leaks, the inexplicable Wi-Fi throttling, the missing mail, it was all starting to take a toll. But what really started shaking their foundation wasn't the inconvenience. It was the isolation. You see, for people like my parents, image is oxygen. They thrive on the appearance of stability, grace, competence. They're the kind of couple who always sent out Christmas cards with coordinated outfits and practiced smiles. Who bragged about Matt's business acumen and my successful little design thing. But now they were losing control of the narrative. People were talking. The story I published, the one that went viral, it had made its way through the local circles. Quietly, but steadily. It wasn't a scandal, exactly. I hadn't named names. But the people who knew? They didn't need names. At a dinner party, one of Mom's friends brought it up casually. Did you read that essay about the daughter whose parents sold her inheritance? Mom, apparently, had turned pale. She claimed she hadn't read it. Said it sounded melodramatic. But the damage was done. She and Dad stopped getting invited to things. Not completely, but noticeably. Fewer brunches. No more couples game nights. The garden club grew quiet. It was like watching a spotlight slowly dim, and in that dimness, their tension grew. They began calling Matt more often. Matt, who had started seeing through their act. After all, it was his house they were slowly circling now. The one they were part owners of. The one they kept hinting at moving into once we redo the downstairs. But Lexi had changed her tune. She wasn't thrilled anymore. Not since the story came out. Not since her own parents had awkwardly asked, wait, wasn't that about your in-laws? Lexi had grown cold. Cordial, but clipped, and Matt had started asking questions. I want to see the paperwork, he told them. The title transfer. The deed. That's when things started to really crack, because the paperwork didn't actually give them as much as they thought. Lexi's lawyer had made sure of that. My parents had been under the impression they were full co-owners. But the truth? They were more like contingency guests, a clause buried deep in fine print that gave them access in case of emergency, but no decision-making power. No equity. When they found that out, Mom lost it. You tricked us. She screamed at Matt, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. We protected ourselves, he said. They fought for hours. Lexi took the kids and drove to her sister's. After that, my parents stopped talking to Matt too. They didn't have many people left, and it showed. They started leaving passive-aggressive comments on my blog, not from their real names, of course. But I recognized the writing. Comments like, "Not all parents are perfect, but some children are ungrateful." Or maybe if the daughter had communicated better, the betrayal wouldn't have happened. At first, I was furious. My hands would tremble hovering over the reply button, but then I laughed, because this was desperation. They couldn't control the story anymore. So they were trying to rewrite it in the comments section. Meanwhile, the condo issues worsened. A pipe burst in the unit below theirs. Their bedroom flooded. The upstairs neighbors got a puppy. The influencers started using a second ring light, brighter, harsher, and then the building got sold. That was the final blow. Of course. I didn't tell them I'd sold it. Didn't mention that I'd made a handsome profit off a distressed property sale to a short-term rental company. Didn't tell them the new management plan to convert their building into Airbnb units over the next 6 months. They got a notice taped to their door. Tenant. Relocation plan in progress. Please prepare for alternative housing by August. And, just like that, their security, their smug little fortress, gone. Mom called me. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Julia, this is getting out of hand. We didn't deserve this. Your father's health isn't good, and this is only making it worse. I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing what you've done to us." That was rich.as, if I'd caused the betrayal.as, if I'd sold their house.as, if I'd ever had a choice. I deleted the message. A week later, Matt called. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Did you sell the condo building?" I paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because Mom thinks it's a conspiracy." "It's not a conspiracy," I said. "It's karma, dressed in legal paperwork." He sighed. "I'm not defending them," he said. "But they're scared. I think they thought they'd never have to face this. They should have thought that before committing fraud." "I know." Silence. Then, "What do you want from them, Julia?" I didn't answer at first, because I didn't know. An apology? Too late. An admission? Maybe, but mostly, I wanted them to feel it. The weight of what they'd done. Not just the act, but the belief behind it. The belief that I was expendable. That I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't fight back. I wanted them to wake up in a room they couldn't afford, with a reputation they couldn't reclaim, and realize they did this. So I said, I want them to stop pretending they were good parents. Matt was quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I think they stopped pretending. I think they know." That landed hard, not because it was vindicating, but because it was sad, because deep down, I had once hoped this would fix us. That if they hurt the way I hurt, we'd somehow meet in the middle. But now, I saw it for what it was. This was the end of a story I'd spent my whole life trying to rewrite, and it was okay to let it end. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. A small envelope, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from my dad. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No, dear Julia. No sign-off, just this. I didn't know what it would cost. That's not an excuse. Just the truth. I should have said no. I should have stopped her. But I didn't. I let it happen. I hope you're free now. I think you are. I read it 3 times, then folded it and put it in the same drawer where I kept Mom's letter, and closed it, because I was free now. Free to live without begging for validation. Free to design my life around peace, not repair. Free to love without guilt. Work without obligation. Exist without apology. That was the real revenge, not the trap, not the chaos. Not even the mural. It was the life I built after they tried to destroy mine, and they would never get to be part of it again. You never really expect the truth to come out on a Wednesday. There's something too ordinary about Wednesdays. Midweek. Beige. The kind of day where you just get through things. Answer emails. Reheat leftovers. Pretend life is on schedule. But that Wednesday, that was the day everything changed. It started with a call from an editor at a podcast I'd admired for years. One of those gritty storytelling shows, real people, real stories, anonymous when necessary, but always emotional, raw, honest. "We read your piece," the producer said. the inheritance one. Would you consider coming on the show to talk about it? I hesitated. I hadn't attached my name to the article. I'd used a pseudonym. The essay had been a controlled burn, personal, but protected. A story, not a declaration, but something about her tone, careful, curious, made me pause. We're doing a series on betrayal inside families, she added. What happens when trust breaks, not from strangers, but from the people closest to us? And we think your story could help a lot of listeners. I didn't say yes right away, but that night, I lay awake in bed thinking about all the people who had messaged me after the article. All the women who had said, "This happened to me too." And I realized something. I wasn't hiding anymore. I emailed the producer the next morning. "You have my voice," I wrote. "And you can use my name." 2 weeks later, I walked into a dimly lit recording studio with a bottle of water, a script outline, and shaking hands. They mic'd me up. Checked levels. Then the host looked at me through the glass and said, "Ready when you are." And I began. I told everything, not just the surface story, the house, the forgery, the fake smile, but the undercurrent of it all. The childhood dynamic. The unspoken rules. The ache of being the daughter who was always overlooked, always expected to understand, to forgive, to accommodate. I told them about the mural. The condo. The noise, the leaks, the Airbnb conversion. I told them about my father's health scare. The letter. The silence that followed, and then I told them the truth I had never written down. They didn't just steal money, I said. They stole a version of me I'll never get back. The one who believed they'd never hurt me on purpose. When the episode aired, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post it. Didn't share a link, but the world has a funny way of finding things when you stop trying to hide them. 3 days after the episode dropped, my cousin Lauren called me. "Oh my God," she said. "I just listened to this podcast and the girl sounded exactly like you." I smiled. "What was it about?" "A woman whose parents sold her lake house behind her back," she said. "Julia, is that you?" I didn't deny it, she gasped. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I paused, because I didn't want to be the one who made the family uncomfortable. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You were uncomfortable, though. You just kept it to yourself." That landed hard. Because it was true. All those years I played nice, kept the peace, smiled through clenched teeth at holidays. That was me absorbing the discomfort, so nobody else had to feel it. Well, not anymore. The episode gained traction fast. Comments flooded in. DMs, emails. People calling it brave, devastating, cathartic. But with attention comes exposure, and with exposure comes fallout. Matt called me again, voice tight. "Mom knows." Of course she did. She heard it through Lauren. Played the whole thing. Then called me crying. "I didn't say anything. She wants to sue," he added. "Says you defamed her." I laughed. "There's no defamation if it's the truth." "She says you twisted things." "She twisted reality for 30 years, I said. "I told a story." "She lived it." Matt sighed. "I don't want to be in the middle of this." "You already are." "A beat. She's talking about getting a lawyer." "Let her," I said calmly. "I have every document. Every deed. Every email." And I did. The notary forgery? Documented. The title change? Backed by a paper trail. The condo lease? Legal. Even the mural? Protected under free speech and private property rights. They had nothing on me, except their shame. And here's the thing about shame. It only becomes powerful when it's hidden. Now it was out in the open, and they were unraveling. The following weekend, my mother sent out a group email to the extended family. She tried to clarify the situation, saying they'd made mistakes, that Julia misinterpreted events, that family matters should be kept private. But the damage was done. People had heard me. In my own voice, unfiltered. For the first time, they saw my side. Some cousins emailed me privately with support. Others were quiet, unsure, choosing neutrality. But my favorite message came from Aunt Naomi. It said simply, "We always knew something was off. Thank you for confirming it." And then came the press. A journalist reached out from a well-known women's magazine. "We'd love to interview you for a piece on generational inheritance and betrayal." I almost said no, but then I thought, why not? Why shouldn't people know what happens when families treat daughters like optional investments? So I said yes, and this time, I used my full name. The article came out with a photo of me sitting on the edge of a dock. Wind in my hair, looking straight into the camera. The headline read, "They stole my inheritance." I took back my power. My parents didn't speak to me after that, not once, but they didn't sue either, because the truth was out, and the trap they thought I'd fall into, it was theirs now. They had to live in the world they created, one where people saw behind the curtain, and I was free. I started getting invitations to speak. Panels, workshops, conferences on family estrangement, women's empowerment, legal literacy. I began consulting on creative projects for survivors of emotional abuse, helping them tell their stories, brand their truths, design a life that felt like theirs again. My client list grew. My peace grew. And one night, sitting on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, the city glowing beneath me, I realized something. They couldn't touch me anymore. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not narratively. Because I had taken the one thing they'd never expected me to take, the mic, and I wasn't giving it back. It didn't happen all at once. The unraveling. My parents didn't wake up one morning and find their reputations burned to ash. That would have been too clean. Too easy. No, their undoing was slower. Piece by piece. Relationship by relationship. Door by door, closing quietly behind them, and I watched it all unfold, from a distance. I wasn't in their lives anymore, not directly. But the ripple effects found their way to me. It started with Mom's charity work. She'd been on the board of a local women's shelter for almost a decade. It gave her something to wear pearls for, something to talk about at brunch, something to help her feel like a good person. But after my podcast episode aired and the article went wide, people started asking questions. Not publicly, no one said it to her face, but behind the scenes, board members started whispering. Someone shared the article link in a private Slack thread. Another forwarded the podcast to the executive director, and just like that, Mom was gently asked to step down. She called mad about it. Crying. Said she was being targeted. That people were twisting the truth. But the truth doesn't twist, it just shows up eventually. Dad lost a few business contacts too. Not his job, he was mostly retired, but the social currency. The golf invites dried up. The holiday card list shrank. Former colleagues didn't return calls. Their circle, once full of polite nods and wine-soaked evenings, started feeling small and worse, uncomfortable, because the people they surrounded themselves with weren't saints. But they were smart enough to protect their own images. And associating too closely with someone who'd been publicly exposed as selfish, manipulative, and, let's be honest, legally questionable, it wasn't worth the risk. They weren't radioactive, but they weren't welcome either. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance on the ashes, but I didn't rescue them either, because here's the thing, this wasn't some internet scandal. This wasn't cancel culture. This was consequence. The kind that doesn't knock, it just walks in one day and says, "Remember me?" They tried to reach out again, of course, this time, through Aunt Diane. She called one evening, her voice wrapped in cautious concern. "They're not doing well, Julia," she said. "I know things got complicated." I cut her off gently. "They didn't get complicated. They got exposed." She sighed. "They made mistakes. They committed fraud." Silence. "I just hate seeing the family like this." "Me too," I said. "But I spent 30 years making sure everyone else was okay. Now I'm making sure I am." She didn't argue, just said, "I hope you know you're not alone." "I do," I said. Finally. Because that was the truth. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a community. A network of people who'd heard my story and said, "Me too." Women from across the country. Different ages, backgrounds, cultures, but the same ache. The same invisible bruises. They sent me letters, emails, art. One woman painted a watercolor of a lake house and mailed it to my office with a note that said, "For the home they couldn't take." Another sent a playlist titled, "Songs for the Daughter Who Fought Back." I framed the watercolor. I played the playlist on mornings I needed to remember who I was, and through it all, I kept working, building, creating. Living Point. One afternoon in October, I walked past a bookstore downtown and saw a familiar headline in the window, "Voices of Resistance, 12 Women Who Changed the Narrative." I stepped closer. There I was, top row, center. A still from the podcast interview. My eyes calm. My shoulders back. I stared at it for a long time, not with pride, with peace, because the woman in that photo, she had stopped asking for permission. She had stopped apologizing for hurting. She had stopped explaining why it mattered, and that, more than the article, the podcast, the mural, the condo trap, that was the real win. I was mine again. But the fallout wasn't just theirs. It reached me too. There were people, friends, extended family, who chose silence. Who never called. Never asked. Who believed the version my parents told before the truth had a chance to speak for itself. That stung. There's something especially painful about people who choose comfort over clarity. Who hear a story like mine and say, "It's not my business." But I let them go, because the people who stayed, they were the ones who mattered, and they reminded me that love without conditions isn't a myth, it's just rare. Lexi, surprisingly, was one of them. We met for coffee one Saturday, after months of tense silence. She looked tired. Pale. Like someone who'd been shouldering more than her share. "I just want you to know," she said, "I believe you." I nodded. "Thank you." I should have said something sooner. I didn't know what to do. "You didn't have to do anything," I said. "You just had to not deny it." She looked relieved, then guilty. "They've been asking to move in again." I laughed, short and sharp. "Of course they have. We said no." Matt's still spineless about it, but I shut it down. Told them we need boundaries. That the kids come first. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw her not as the polished wife or the reluctant sister-in-law. I saw her as a woman who had learned the hard way what happens when you let toxicity set up camp in your spare room. "I'm proud of you," I said. She smiled. "I think I'm finally proud of me too." We parted with a hug. Not tight. Not warm, but real, and real was enough. A week later, I got one final letter from my mother, typed this time. No envelope. Just slipped under my office door. It read, "We've lost everything. You've made sure of that. I hope one day you understand what you've done." But I won't hold my breath. I stared at the paper for a long time, then crumpled it and dropped it into the trash, not out of spite, but because it didn't belong to me anymore. Their guilt, their shame, their inability to own what they'd done. It wasn't mine to carry. I had my own life now, and I was finally ready to live it without them. There's no neat ending to a story like this. No perfect bow tied around the chaos. No magical scene where everyone hugs it out, apologizes, cries into their coffee, and walks away redeemed. Real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes closure doesn't come from others. It comes when you stop waiting for it, and that's what I learned. Not in some epiphany. Not all at once. But gradually, as I kept living without them, without the guilt, without the aching hope that one day they'd show up and say all the right things. They didn't, and they probably never will, but I showed up for myself. That was the closure. I've moved twice since this story began. The first move was just geography, a new apartment, new zip code, a brighter space with bigger windows and less memory embedded in the walls. The second move was internal. I stopped trying to prove my worth to people determined not to see it. I stopped explaining myself to anyone who started their questions with, "But didn't you think?" I stopped waiting to be understood by the very people who taught me not to expect kindness without condition, and I started building something of my own, not revenge, not payback. But life. A real one. On my terms. I expanded my agency. Hired 2 junior designers. Took on a nonprofit client that focuses on financial education for young women, especially those estranged from their families or dealing with legacy trauma. I donated to a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name, and I started hosting small workshops. Quiet, intimate spaces where women could bring their betrayal stories and design something new from the wreckage. A brand. A blog. A small business. A plan. Not everything needs to be loud to be revolutionary. Sometimes the softest steps leave the deepest marks. People always ask if I ever spoke to them again. My parents. The answer? No, and not because I'm angry, because I'm free. Forgiveness. The real kind doesn't always involve reconciliation. Sometimes it means saying, "I release this. I release you. I release the power this once had over me." I forgave them in pieces. The part of me that used to flinch when my phone buzzed? Forgiven. The part of me that used to rehearse imaginary confrontations in the mirror? Forgiven. The version of me that believed I was only as valuable as what I could do for others. She's not just forgiven, she's gone, replaced by someone new, someone quiet, but unshakable. Someone who owns her life like a deed no one else can sign. A few months ago, I visited Lake Hartley again. Not the house, I didn't go near it, just the water. I stood at the edge of the dock, the same one I used to sit on with Pop when I was 12. My legs swinging above the lake, my hair always tangled with wind. The air smelled like pine and old wood. The sun was low, casting gold across the surface. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just breathed. In, out, and I whispered, I kept it, Pop. Not the house. The part of me you believed in. Because that was what they couldn't take. They took wood and brick. They took false ownership, but they didn't take me, and now I spend my Sundays however I want. Not at family dinners where I'm erased. Not cleaning up messes I didn't make. Sometimes I walk to the farmer's market. Sometimes I stay in bed with a book and hot coffee. Sometimes I meet friends, real ones, who see me, listen to me, don't measure me by how much I give without asking for anything back. I built a life out of the pieces they thought were discardable, and it's beautiful, imperfect, honest, mine. Matt and I aren't close. We text on holidays. He sends photos of his kids. I send birthday cards. There's no resentment anymore. But there's no closeness either. We exist parallel. I think that's okay. Lexi once sent me a DM on Instagram. Just a heart emoji under a photo I posted of a tiny tattoo I got on my wrist. It says, mine. She knew what it meant. Most people didn't. That's how healing works sometimes. Quiet symbols only the survivors understand. I know my parents still live in the suburbs. I heard they downsized. Moved into a townhouse. Rumor has it they told people it was a strategic financial choice. That they wanted to simplify. I let them have that story. I don't need to ruin them. They have to live with themselves. That's enough. Someone once asked me, don't you wish they'd apologize? And for a long time, the answer was yes. But now, no, because anything they could say wouldn't undo what they believed, that my life was something they were entitled to manipulate, manage, and mine for their own convenience. And the truth is, I don't want anything from people who only value me when I'm silent and compliant. I want peace, and I have it now. I end my own apartment. I end my own body. I end my own mind. Sometimes when I tell people this story, they ask, so what's the lesson? And I tell them this. The lesson isn't to get even. The lesson is to get honest about who you are, what you need, what you will no longer accept, and the moment you get honest, everything changes. I'm Julia. I'm 33. And I am no one's backup plan. No one's doormat. No one's silent investment. I'm a woman who rebuilt everything they tried to take and made it better than they ever could have imagined. I'm mine now, all the way.